We've got another remake of an early video today. Gen 1's Onix and its Gen 2 evolution, Steelix. Onix was introduced to the world in the first generation as part of Brock's team both in the games and in the anime. The Orange Islands episode featuring Crystal Onix was also a superb one, and we wish Crystal Onix would have appeared in official games. Shoutouts to Pokemon Naranja. As for Steelix, it was the main Pokemon of Johto's Steel Gym leader, Jasmine, and was quite difficult for many players to get since it only evolved from Onix when traded while holding a metal coat. It also was quite imposing in the split second it rises out of the ground to appear behind Blastoise, Houndoom, and Rhydon in the Pokemon Johto League Champions era of the anime. The kind of split second that never leaves you. We've got a competitive history as lengthy as both of these snakes today, so let's launch right into things. How great were Onix and Steelix actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Onix was absolutely pitiful in the first generation. It's got insane defense, yes, the second highest in the game after Cloyster, and pretty good speed, honestly. But that's it. Everything else is downright dreadful. Its HP stat is one of the worst in the game, nullifying that great defense, as is its special, meaning it's not a hit taker, and it's not dishing those hits out either, given that its attack is similarly appalling. Let's put it this way, Onix has less HP and attack than Bulbasaur, and even Explosion, Stab, Earthquake, and Rock Slide aren't going to be enough to make up for that defect. The gimmickiest of gimmicks was to use Onix because it had Bind on full Wrap team, since Bind was a variant of Wrap in Gen 1, and Onix could check Zapdos with its typing. But even if you were going to go full Wrap, there were much better Pokemon you could use than Onix. Having a Zapdos answer wasn't worth using a Pokemon that was so awful against literally everything else. Onix was pitiful in the lower tiers too, and rightfully dropped to untiered, only reserved for use on the silliest of occasions. Either you were cosplaying as Brock, or you were trying to embarrass your friend with it so you could laugh and say they lost to Onix. Yeah, that's it. With a stratospheric defense stat and solid HP, leaving even Skarmory in the dust in terms of pure physical bulk, alongside its crucial normal resistance, Steelix took on one of the most important roles in GSC, a Snorlax check. It was far from a hard counter, of course, but as far as methods of playing around the big bear, the Iron Snake was one of the best, especially for the offensive teams it was used on that would otherwise struggle massively. That's right, despite the massive defense, Steelix was geared towards offensive teams, like a much more aggressive version of Skarmory. What it lacked in Skarm's Spike's immunity, it made up for with one of the scariest moves in the game, Explosion. Steelix wouldn't go gung-ho with booms though, as it wasn't one for immediate power, both in playstyle and attack stat. Steelix checked Snorlax defensively and played offense the same way, with gradual build-up over time. Steelix, just like anything not named Machamp, wasn't overwhelming Snorlax offensively, but with Roar, it would neutralize Curse, fulfilling the necessity for 99% of GSC teams to carry a phaser that was also a normal resist, as to not get crushed by Sleep Talk Curselax. Its bulk was so enormous, it also didn't fear getting slept by Lovely Kiss Curselax, as it tanked even boosted double edges all day, and it just took waking up and cursing once to swing the matchup. What about Earthquake Curselax? Well, Steelix would also curse, outspeeding the -1 lax to do so before getting hit for the full force of a boosted Earthquake. And without a curse advantage, Snorlax's EQs wouldn't quite bounce off, but they wouldn't do enough to stop Steelix from cursing repeatedly and eventually winning the 1v1 through the threat of Explosion against a chipped Snorlax trying to match its curses. Trading Steelix for Snorlax was absolutely a win for the Steelix user. What about Fire Move Curselax? That was rough, but the lack of Earthquake would make Snorlax more susceptible to being checked by a teammate like Steelix's go-to partner Gengar. Basically, in a world where every Snorlax answer was flawed one way or another, Steelix was one of the most reliable choices, especially because it wasn't trying to be a permanent hard counter. It was trying to generate offense. And before we get to that though, it also must be mentioned that a major reason Steelix's defensive niche was so good was that it didn't just answer Snorlax. With its electric immunity and neutrality to hidden power ice, it also helped take on the legendary electric duo of Zapdos and Raikou, aka the second and third strongest Pokemon in the tier. Even if these ran HP water, simply having the Thunder immunity on one's team made it easier to switch Lax into the Electrics, since they'd likely try and catch the switch with hidden power. As if that wasn't enough, Steelix was also a strong answer to the opposing Gengar. So it was with this amazing defensive profile that Steelix found ways to generate offense, through Spike shuffling opponents with Roar, then exploding on something, potentially backed by Curse. This was effective against offense and stall alike. Oh, that was another major major strength of Steelix's. Its toxic immunity gave it incredible longevity against Stall, and the go-to physical wall Skarmory was hapless against it as well. Number 1, because Drill Peck was laughable. Number 2, for this following more intricate reason. Yes, with the standard set of Curse, Earthquake, Roar, and Explosion, Steelix would be unable to hit Skarmory at all without blowing up, which was of course resisted. However, here's how it worked. In Gen 2, the slower Pokemon using the phasing move win. Steelix uses Curse as Skarmory switches in. Next turn, both use their phasing moves. Skarmory's Whirlwind goes first and fails because it's faster. Steelix's slower Roar having blocked it, and Skarm gets phased out instead. This lets Steelix go crazy with Spike Shuffling against other stall Pokemon it beat or wasn't threatened by, like Mischievous, Umbreon, and Miltank. And after multiple curses, plus to not be as thwarted by Charm or Growl of course, Raikou Snorlax spreading plenty of damage for its teammates to abuse. It couldn't roar forever, but it didn't need to, as eventually it would unleash a 999 attack explosion, which would take out Skarmory as well. It wasn't even a 71.8% roll to take out a Skarmory that cursed a +1 defense. Once Skarm was gone, Snorlax would go berserk, and if Steelix KO'd something else, then another teammate would step in as being more threatening. This type of synergistic bait explosion became a defining GSC strategy. If a stall team tried to threaten Steelix more immediately with Suicune, it only needed one curse to take that out. As such, Steelix was a major playmaker that opened up huge gaps for offensive teammates like Machamp and Vaporeon to abuse. It was so good at this role that it became a staple Pokemon for the essential spot it occupied on standard explosion heavy offense. These so-called boom teams overtook Stall as the defining team of the GSC OU landscape, as they specialized in defeating Stall and were generally incredibly easy and consistent to use. Quite an achievement and legacy. Steelix's inability to hit flying Pokemon without roaring or blowing up could be more problematic against offensive teams as Zapdos, but it was still an effective Spike Shuffler, and plus, Zapdos really didn't like being risked to boom either. Just like Steelix or Snorlax was an advantageous trade for the Steelix user, so too was Steelix for Zapdos. Plus, if the Steelix user wanted a bit more precision in the matchup, they could eschew Curse in favor of Body Slam or Dragon Breath, letting Steelix take on the role of Paralysis Spreader that also acted as major support for its sweeping teammates. Wait, who on earth would run Dragon Breath when Steelix's special attack was so pathetic? Well, specifically because it was so weak, you could lower its special attack EV so it wouldn't even outdamage Zapdos' leftovers, meaning Zapdos would be unable to use Rest to rid itself of the paralysis, making it infinitely easier to abuse with one's other Pokemon. Snorlax could switch into it better, Cloyster could threaten Boom on it, Vaporeon and Machamp would rip through it, and so on. As a bonus, Dragon Breath was a safe move to spam into Gengar, as even if it stayed in, Steelix could threaten the paralysis, or Gengar couldn't pivot into it like it could a Body Slam. Either way, it offered a ton of flexibility. Usually, Curse Steelix was far too valuable to give up, and Paralysis Steelix was a solid alternative. So overall, Steelix was an incredibly important part of GSC OU. That's not all either. Steelix was also a majorly important part of GSC Ubers, primarily for the same reasons as OU, Snorlax and Electrics, and being especially useful against Snorlax, given its proclivity for running mono-attacking Lovely Kiss Curse sets. However, it also had another major role. It shrugged off even boosted Aeroblasts all day, and its speed was so much lower than Lugia's that it would be slower even after Lugia had cursed, meaning it could safely roar Lugia out. Steelix was also a good check to Growth Jolteon, which was a massive threat in the Uber's metagame. It feared HP Water, but it didn't automatically drop by any means, and threatened back with Earthquake, so it helped ensure Snorlax wasn't the only tool a team had against Jolteon. Additionally, Steelix had its usual niche in taking on stall teams, being completely unfazed, pun intended, by Skarmory, or that other big physical wall in Ubers, Lugia. It also had some other major targets to its list of Pokemon that it could take on and blow up. Once it had amassed curses, standard Swords Dance Mew would struggle against it. It could threaten to blow up Celebi, and potentially even Mewtwo. Overall, Steelix's debut generation was an incredible success, and now that Onix wasn't a fully evolved Pokemon, the fact that it couldn't hack a niche even in NU was no longer shameful. And rest assured that, despite NU being a tier primarily consisting of not fully evolved Pokemon, Onix was entirely worthless, given that it couldn't even cheese with Bind anymore, given the move's changed mechanics. And even a stronger Explosion was still awful with its sub-Butterfree attack stat. But hey, it's not a final stage Pokemon anymore, so it's all good. Advanced Steelix had serious competition as a non-Skarmory bulky steel with newcomers Metagross and Jirachi, which were better overall. Steelix mostly competed with Metagross, since Metagross was also directly threatening Tyranitar in return like Jirachi couldn't, a crucial distinction against Dragon Dance T-Tar. However, Steelix's unique traits ensured it had a serious legitimate niche. First of all, with its much higher defense, it had Metagross beat at withstanding the many earthquakes they'd have to contend with from Aerodactyl, Tyranitar, opposing Metagrosses, Salamence, and Dugtrio. That higher defense also made it much better at withstanding opposing Choice Band Metagross Meteor Mash, and even Explosion. Steelix was the best viable non-ghost in the game to take Metagross's mighty Skarmory KOing Choice Band Boom. Second of all, Steelix boasted different typing, which provided its game a superbly unique element. It packed a wonderful quadruple rock resist, making it the best Pokemon in the game at taking absolutely nothing from Aerodactyl and Tyranitar's stab Choice Band rock slides, which in and of itself was already huge for longevity. The ability to devour Heracross's Mega Horn was also excellent, but where Steelix really improved over Metagross though was its electric immunity. With the neutrality to both Hidden Power Ice and Grass, all it took was some special defense investment, and Steelix was an amazing Zapdos answer, something Metagross could lay no claim to. Being able to take on so many physical threats and possibly the scariest special attacker in the tier was an absolutely incredible trait, and provided Steelix's team amazing utility in that they wouldn't be forced to send in their special wall like Blissey or Celebi against Zapdos, thus protecting it from the Dugtrio Zapdos was so often paired with. Dugtrio's Earthquake practically bounced off of Steelix, while one layer of spikes and Steelix's Earthquake would take Dugtrio out in return. With Protect grabbing extra leftovers for Steelix, Zapdos wasn't going to wear it into range even with repeated hits either, not without sustaining damage for Steelix itself at any rate. With these excellent traits in mind, Steelix found itself on a fair few defensive teams and performing quite well for them. It was particularly apt alongside Wish Salamence, whose superb type synergy alongside Steelix let it heal it further with Wish, and between Intimidate and Steelix's huge physical bulk, anything physical would be answered. Steelix was specific in advance, which is why it was BL as opposed to OU, but very good in that specific role. Steelix also had another decent niche in Ubers. Its Thunder immunity was once again useful to help pivot around the dominant Laddie twins. It had to be careful of their strong Ice Beam, but seeing as Thunder was their most dangerous attack, being able to slow them down was valuable. Resisting occasional sets with Dragon Claw was also helpful. Steelix also leveraged its typing and defense to great effect against many massive Choice Banders' most spammed attacks, like Deoxys Attack's Shadow Ball, Lugia's Aeroblast, Ho-Oh's Hidden Power Flying, Rayquaza's Hidden Power Ghost, Heracross's Mega Horn, and Metagross's Meteor Mash. In response, Steelix was quite a decent Choice Bander itself, its Explosion being able to lure in and take out major threats like Groudon and Kyogre. It also spammed the neutral coverage of Double Edge nicely, since Rock Head prevented recoil damage. Steelix had to be much more careful in this much stronger Uber tier, but it still had a legitimate role. Onix technically had the tiniest of niches in NU, as its solid speed and explosion allowed it to set up Sunny Day and get out of the way, getting some decent damage in the process, letting its chlorophyll abusing teammates Blossom and Tangela hit the field with as much sun left as possible. But given Onix's plethora of weaknesses to common attacks, as well as its abysmal HP and special defense, meaning it feared even neutral special hits like Chimecho's Psychic, meant that nobody actually used it. There were far more reliable ways to set sun than using such a gimmick that struggled to hit the field and then didn't exactly threaten much damage either. Onix only had a niche in a situation where someone would call Onix useless garbage, then someone else would metaphorically push up their glasses and say that, well, actually, it can set sun, but even Onix's advocate would never actually use it, and after that conversation, it would never be mentioned again, at least in terms of enabling annoying conversationalists. So their Onix was pretty good. With power creep factored in, Steelix was now officially a UU Pokemon, but that was just fine. With the addition of Stealth Rock, it gained an incredible deal of utility, able to translate its defensive profile's many switch-in opportunities into superb team support. And with its quadruple rock resist, it was among the few Pokemon in the game that actually gained health after switching into rocks, only taking 3.125% from them and gaining 6.25% back from leftovers, for a net of 3.125%. 50%. This meant it was incredible in terms of longevity, letting it manage the offensive threats it was tasked with handling repeatedly. This, in conjunction with its much higher defense, making it much better guarded against Dugtrio, were two of its major advantages over its bulky steel competition. Registeel, another being its access to Roar, whose phasing capabilities were massive for the stall team Steelix anchored, and another still being its much higher attack stat that allowed it to wield a much scarier bait explosion, and a stab combination that hit most boom resists well, making it far likelier the boom would land on a neutral target that would be KO'd, ensuring Steelix was not just a stall Pokemon, but one that could be used well on offense too. It was also capable of actually KOing Dugtrio in return without booming. Whichever style of Steelix wound up on, it used its many resists to take on a huge portion of the metagame. Stabs wielded by major offensive threats like Scyther, Aggron, Swellow, Kangaskhan, Mesprit, Rotom, and Tauros simply bounced off. Even their coverage options weren't particularly scary for Steelix's gargantuan bulk, especially since Steelix did quite a good job threatening them in return, whether with Roar, Toxic, or its stabs. It didn't resist Leafeon's stab Leaf Blade, but laughed at it all the same. Even several super effective stabs like Kabutops' Waterfall or Toxicroak's Low Kick were hardly threatening anything near a one-hit KO. Roar was effective against pretty much everything when supported by spikes, as it so often was, and so too was Explosion. Once Steelix's walling duties were no longer needed, it could take advantage of Pokemon like Milotic and Venusaur trying to switch into it, and pull off an advantageous trade. This strategy actually spoke to a deceptive diversity in Steelix's game, the way it could customize its moveset. Some offensive, attack-heavy Steelix would run Pastoral Berry as their item, allowing them to stay in on Milotic to guarantee they took it out, opening up avenues for destruction for Fire-type teammates. Pastoral was incredibly useful against the tier's litany of other water types too, of course. Aqua Berry was similarly effective, especially alongside Stone Edge. Suddenly, you'd see your Moltres unexpectedly yet resoundingly deleted. Steelix wasn't a flashy Pokemon, but it was incredibly useful, consistent, and even customizable. This is why it tied many teams together with efficiency on par with the Big Lebowski's Rug, and was a great Pokemon in Gen 4 UU. Generation 4 is when Little Cup officially started being played as a competitive 6v6 singles format. Sadly, Onix wasn't viable at all, because it lost to, and this really isn't an exaggeration, almost every single decent Pokemon. Gligar, Snover, Machop, Bronzor, Ghastly, and forget about anything if it faced a Rain team. It couldn't take on Munchlax reliably. Even Fire types tended to wreck it. Sure, you could maybe get Rocks and Explode with Onix, but you were far better off using a Pokemon that had some actual positive matchups, rather than trying to wrest some sort of usage from a Pokemon that feared KOs at every corner. Thus, Onix was non-existent in the first generation of Little Cup. Gen 5's Explosion nerf was sad for Steelix, but it continued to succeed all the same. Power creep ensured it wasn't making it back to UU, but Steelix joined the new RU tier with gusto. This metagame was often noted for its resemblance of DPP UU, and thus it should come as no surprise that Steelix excelled there. Its defensive profile was incredible, taking on familiar faces like Aggron, Mesprit, and Kabutops, just as it did new ones in Druddigon, Durant, and Escavalier. Steelix was one of the faces, if not the face of Stall, with its incredible resilience naturally making the playstyle quite robust into the metagame's many menacing monsters. Oh, but what of its lack of recovery? Never fear, Wish support is here. When bolstered by Clefable or Lomomola, Steelix could sometimes feel immortal as it tanked hit after hit after hit for such little damage, and just when you thought you were getting somewhere, having hit it so many times, all that progress would be undone. Oh, and if you thought it was too passive and taunt weak, it could slot out its usual roar for the newly gained Dragon Tail. Once again though, Steelix wasn't just a stall Pokemon. This was its primary role, but eventually, with the help of some creativity, it turned out to be just as superb a supporting piece on offensive teams. Offense generally didn't like the standard defensive set's passivity, but that wasn't what they used. Instead, they went with max attack Adamant Nature and Custat Berry. This allowed Steelix to provide offensive teams with the Druddigon switch they were so sorely lacking. They'd usually struggle to stave it off, and here was a Pokemon that turned it into an opportunity for Stealth Rock, and it did this while keeping momentum, thanks to its hard-hitting stabs, and even though the move had been nerfed, Explosion. This, especially in conjunction with Sturdy's new status as a built-in Focus Sash, and Custat Berry's ability to turn Steelix being beaten down by attacks into low health into an opportunity to go first on a key turn, allowed Steelix plenty of flexible, aggressive play, which made it a superb fit for advancing an offensive team's game plan. For instance, if you didn't need Steelix much in a particular game, you could lead off with it, stay in even against Moltres, surviving Fire Blast, get rocks up, then Cuss That would kick in and you'd explode, potentially dropping Moltres, or at the very least, chunking something else and getting major momentum for your hard hitters. Alternatively, in a different type of matchup, you could switch Snorlax into Durant and or Druddigon again and again over the course of a game, and strategically position yourself so that you could use the Cuss That berry to check a big threat later on. It was a wonderful option that many offensive teams loved having, and thus Steelix became popular on more fast-paced teams as well. Whether it was hard stall, hyper offense, or sometimes even balance, Steelix found itself a place on many of RU's most successful teams and was consistently a major reason for those teams being as successful as they were, chalking up another superb generation for itself. Onix enjoyed Gen 5's sturdy buff, giving it a built-in focus sash, allowing it to experiment with other items and giving it some depth to its game. But the item it'd want to use, Berry Juice, was banned. As such, Onix was thoroughly outclassed as a Stealth Rock user by the greater offensive threat and spikes of Ammonite, or the greater bulk and better typing of Lileep and Hippopotas. Thus, it remained not worth using and non-existent as a result. Steelix's toolkit wasn't at all suited to VGC. Slow, not very threatening offensively, weak to spread moves, no double-centric utility, and there was another steel ground type running the meta. Its name was Excadrill. Except for Adib Alam, who rocked it to a 10th place finish at the US Nationals 2013. He used an unorthodox Sheer Force Lifeorb set with boosted Iron Heads and Ice Fangs, leveraging its excellent synergy with Gyarados. Why not Excadrill? Well, Excadrill couldn't fit Ice Fang, nor was it nearly as effective against Trick Room, given its much lower bulk, making it incapable of taking on threats like a Scavalier. Steelix itself basically acted as an Excadrill, but the Trick Room variant, and Adib's team was all about Trick Room. And Steelix packed that all-important Ice Fang coverage. Steelix's high bulk was on full display when supported by Gyarados' Intimidate, letting it tank truly insane moves like Terrakion Fighting Gem Close Combat. Plus, Adib's Cresselia ran Light Screen, patching Steelix up on its lower special defense. This kind of incredibly specific yet perfectly fitting niche is what creative team building is all about. Congrats to Alib for being Steelix's sole advocate and for such an impressive placement with it. Steelix received an amazing buff in Generation 6, a Mega Evolution. Mega Steelix becomes even more obscenely physically bulky while also receiving a gigantic boost to its attack, hitting from a powerful base 125 and no longer being vulnerable on the special side of things, going up to a solid base 95 special defense. Mega Steelix was basically a more complete, optimized version of its base form, and in many ways a new threat since it now hit hard in addition to better than ever tanking abilities. Losing Leftovers was unfortunate, sure, but it had used Leftovers less sets to great effect before, and it was nothing a teammate couldn't fix. Steelix was used for some time on stall in UU, indeed bolstered by its old Gen 5 RU friend Alomamola's Wish again, this time to compensate for its lack of Leftovers, and while it was certainly a fine Pokemon, it was unspectacular, leading to low overall usage. It was quite specific, and for general purposes, UU players tended to prefer the far more threatening Mega Aggron. As such, Mega Steelix found itself in RU, but there it was absolutely incredible, widely considered the tier's best Mega, too good not to use in nearly all circumstances. The one notable exception was Mega Abomasnow, and do you know why that was such a good Pokemon? Because Mega Steelix, once again in conjunction with its best friend Alomomola, were so good at taking on so much of the metagame. Mega Abomasnow rose because it was capable of beating both of them, and it was so good at this that Mega Abomasnow itself got banned. That's the kind of influence over the tier we're talking, and that influence stemmed from Mega Steelix being so good defensively and offensively that it basically had the tier in a stranglehold. It was so ruthless, so immovable, and so common, capable of being used on a huge range of teams from hard stall to bulky offense, that it almost single-handedly dictated the viability of an incredible number of Pokemon, resorting to inferior movesets just to try and limit its effectiveness, while completely invalidating many others. I mean, Escavalier in a Mega Steelix meta? Nah. Well, there was no other Mega you'd want to run more. Not Camerupt, not Glalie, nothing. Its presence was limiting to the point of over-centralization. It was basically turning RU into Mega Steelix and a small circle of friends in the tier. It was so good that it was the reason the otherwise broken Tyrantrum wasn't banned the first time around. The reasoning being, how can its head smash that destroys pretty much everything else be overwhelming if Mega Steelix is around? This generally stemmed from its incredible defensive defensive prowess, but that defense was what allowed it to unleash such fierce offense consistently too. It wasn't unstoppable in this regard, but still immensely difficult to deal with when the few Pokemon that didn't instantly crumple to its monstrously strong Heavy Slam or the Earthquake that complemented it so well either got toxic or didn't heal. And remember, the latter was major when contending with Mega Steelix's constant reinforcement by Alomomola. Basically, Mega Steelix was the epitome of high reward, low risk. If you weren't a fire or water type, you were probably getting messed up something fierce by Mega Steelix one-on-one, and the fires and waters generally weren't the most keen on switching into it either. Dealing with Mega Steelix was a risky mess of pivot switches that tended to leave an inordinate amount of damage strewn throughout your team. This wasn't desirable for a Pokemon that was so good there was no reason not to use it. If it was a riskier type of Pokemon that couldn't always be spammed, then sure, but Mega Steelix was practically omnipresent, warping the metagame around it and still succeeding. Not going with Mega Steelix was generally just making matters worse for yourself, other than the times Mega Abomasnow was being used to counter Mega Steelix and Alomomola, which of course didn't last as mentioned before, and even then, Mega Aboma teams really felt the lack of Mega Steelix's insane defensive presence. Not that it couldn't be used thoughtfully, as Mega Steelix was truly brainless, with pretty much zero downside for being slapped on every team. As a result, it was eventually banned from RU, alongside Tyrantrum, which was of course insanely busted itself without Mega Steelix to contain it. Meanwhile, Base Steelix continued excelling. After Mega Steelix was banned from RU, many players, well, they didn't truly replace Mega Steelix, as Base Steelix was far less outright threatening, but regardless, they used Steelix, and its typing, bulk, and move pool found it a great deal of viability and success for much of the same reason as its Mega Evolution had. It wasn't a major offensive threat, of course, but its defensive presence was highly valuable and certified it as a legitimate choice on the balanced teams that came to rule the meta. Base Steelix's real home in this generation, though, was NU. Having such a bulky steel type in such a low tier populated by lower stat Pokemon, generally relying on resistance stab, was a recipe for Steelix's success. And it was cooked to perfection, as Steelix came to be one of the tier's most elite Pokemon. There were so many top tier threats that Steelix could take on: Mesprit, Tauros, Archeops, Klinklang, Masharna, Kangaskhan, and what's more, not much of the rest of the metagame was too comfortable switching into Steelix, given how effective its stabs and Toxic were at doing at least something to just about everything. Its stabs hit everything, while Toxic handled the waters that took on the stabs. Aside from Ferroseed, nothing was really safe. They weren't in mortal danger either, but Steelix wasn't playing a big flashy game. It was, however, incredibly consistent at withstanding the opponent's hits and then chipping away at them. Even the potentially irritating Xatu was a few pursuits away from a clear field of Steelix. All in all, Steelix was an integral, defining part of Gen 6 NU, capping off an incredible generation for it. Now you might wonder at this point, for 5 generations, Onix has been absolutely horrendous. Why is it even included time and time again? If you're dead set on being completionist, can't you just sum it up as Onix being internally terrible? Well, that's the thing. Come Gen 6, Onix was not only no longer terrible, it was genuinely good. Berry Juice was unbanned, and thus Onix could use it to great effect. It was referred to as 3 lives Onix, because you could have a move that one-hit KO'd it, yet you would still have to hit it 3 times to actually take it down. Onix would live the first with Sturdy, then Berry Juice would kick in and bring it back to full health, reactivating Sturdy and letting it take another hit. This made Onix excellent at leading off and getting Stealth Rock, while still retaining its biggest boon. Fletchling was a major threat, one of the biggest in the tier, and Onix countered the absolute daylights out of it, repeatedly taking absolute pittance from acrobatics and threatening it greatly in return. Furthermore, Onix was similarly excellent against the dangerous Archon. Onix's solid speed also meant it could really mess up Sticky Web teams, whose best setter was Surskit, who speed tied Onix and could be taunted or even KO'd through Focus Sash with Rock Blast. You may recall Onix's pitiful attack stat, but remember, Little Cup is played at level 5, so its attack is perfectly serviceable for such situations, also letting it threaten Fletchling and Archon easily. Onix could also slot Endure in its moveset, letting it survive a hit at 1 HP even without Sturdy intact, as to allow Berry Juice to kick in and indeed give it Sturdy back. Onix wasn't a star Pokemon by any means, but it was a notable, serious part of the tier, an effective tool for both leading an offensive charge with momentum and answering one of the most dangerous Pokemon in the tier. Finally, some viability, and not just a tiny niche either. Onix was a bona fide part of Gen 6 Little Cup. Strangely, Mega Steelix was actually better in Gen 7. This time around, it found itself in UU proper. On one hand, this was strange, given not just power creep, but the stringent Mega competition in the tier, with beasts like Aerodactyl and Altaria being among the most defining, as well as the excellence of Manectric, Sharpedo, Slowbro, and Steelix's rival, Aggron. However, both power creep and these most defining Megas were precisely what gave Mega Steelix such a great role in the tier. The fact that it was so good against them. Mega Aerodactyl and Altaria's hits bounced off of Mega Steelix, while it leveraged its superb typing and ability to hit back to take on many other meta-defining threats in Latios and Togekiss as well. And it was just generally incredibly resilient in the face of many other Pokemon like Mimikyu, Doublade, and Bisharp, using this excellent defensive profile to set up Stealth Rock and naturally threaten so much of its switch-ins with its stab combination. Whereas it previously enjoyed Toxic, now Steelix made superb use of Curse, which cranked Gyro Ball up to incredible levels of power by both lowering its speed and boosting its attack. This prevented the Toxic immune Defog Gligar from stalling it out, letting Mega Steelix maintain rocks and let Mega Steelix easily defeat the likes of Scizor and Hippowdon. The Hippowdon interaction was particularly amusing because Mega Steelix's ability was Sand Force, which was usually useless, but whose stabs now gained a much appreciated Life Orb boost when opposing Hippowdon set up Sand for it. The Curse boost also meant it was utterly unbreakable physically. Forget revenging it with Crocodile and Terrakion. Of course, Toxic was still a solid choice, preventing Defog, Moltres, and Rotom Heat from sitting on it while still punishing Hippowdon. As always, Mega Steelix loved pairing with Alomomola, but also enjoyed use alongside Blissey, their wishes allowing it to do its thing again and again. Once more, it wasn't flashy, but it was incredibly consistent, and it's wonderful to see a Pokemon naturally do better in a subsequent generation without the help of extraneous buffs. Base Steelix returned to NU, where it was once again absolutely elite. Even with leftovers, it loved the reinforcement it so effortlessly got from Vaporeon's huge wishes, making it even more stellar at taking on what felt like the entire metagame at times. Its overflowing list of resists let it swing its way into practically every top threat in some form or another, from Druddigon to Aerodactyl to Heliolisk to Sneasel to Vivillon to Comfey, and its stupefying physical bulk meant even many super effective hits didn't really scare it, extending its reach even further. Scarf Passimian's close combat was a strong stab attack, but it would run like heck away from Steelix in even decent condition. At this point, you know what Steelix does, and it continued to do it beautifully. Even potential roadblocks like Xatu were nothing team support like Pursuit Sneasel couldn't handle, and everything else bar Ferroseed was pressured very naturally, which meant Steelix was constantly pressuring much of the tier given how constantly it was switching in, and Vaporeon's huge wishes supporting it meant it could even be cavalier with its health, allowing it to play more aggressively and opening up flexibility, while not fearing the loss of its leftovers if it were to come into a Sneasel knockoff. Basically, Steelix just like you'd want Steelix to Steelix. As a result of doing just Steelix things once again, Gen 7 was another excellent one for it. It was now Onix's time to really shine. It was the single best Stealth Rock setter in Gen 7 Little Cup. It was helped by Ferroseed falling out of favor, given that its defensive playstyle was much more difficult to make work in a tier with a stronger Ponyta, mandatory fighters, and the power creep of Z-moves, but none of these stopped Onix's fast-paced playstyle. 3 Lives Onix continued to excel, with its resilience making it incredibly consistent at getting up rocks against basically everything. The multi-hit Rock Blast also let it threaten opposing Stealth Rock leads in Archon and Dwebble. However, it wasn't just beholden to Berry Juice anymore. It now had a second superb set in the form of Weak Armor, which dropped Sturdy's built-in stash for huge offensive potential. Weak Armor has been buffed in Gen 7 to give +2 speed instead of +1 as it had previously, meaning in the event Onix took a physical hit, it suddenly outsped everything. And with Onix's huge physical bulk, backed by the further boost from the Eviolite it would hold on to the set, that also gave it plentiful opportunity to pop up Stealth Rock, meant it devours such hits easily. It was so physically bulky that even the -1 defense from Weak Armor wouldn't bother it too much, and even in those potential situations where it did, it was compensated for by the fact that Onix had had its speed boosted so far and was threatening. What was so great about Onix's ability to run either of those two sets at a high level wasn't just that Onix could switch it up for the sake of it, it's that dealing with them was vastly different to the point of pretty much being opposite, and not knowing which set it was running could and often did really mess opponents up. Against Sturdy Juice Onix, you would chip it with a weaker move to nullify Sturdy without triggering Berry Juice, and after afterwards you could threaten it. However, if you try this against weak armor Onix, you've just boosted its speed and are now staring down a scarier threat. It stabs, putting some serious pressure on much of the metagame. With Vullaby also as prominent as it was, Gen 7 Little Cup was a weak armor heavy tier, and indeed it was often on display as Onix was used to check Vullaby, given that it was faster before boost, and Rock Blast's multi-hit nature could take advantage of weak armor's defense lowering on each hit. Switching into Vullaby's Brave Bird would also trigger Onix's own weak armor. Onix could also run Groundium Z with an adamant nature, as the surprise factor and extra power let it pose an unexpected, potentially game-breaking threat against something like Marini. Rare, but it had its usage in the hands of a skilled player. It also had the major benefit of not fearing knockoff, both in terms of not losing its item and in the less damage it takes. So overall, Onix was a superb Pokemon in the 7th generation of Little Cup, one of the tier's best and most defining. Mega Steelix wasn't a VGC contender for the same reason Base Steelix wasn't. Definitely not the kind of Pokemon you want to burn your Mega slot on. However, it somehow managed 2 placements in early 2018. Max Loganseepen reached 20th at the Sydney Internationals while using it on a Gigalith Sand team, activating Mega Steelix's Sand Force for serious damage from its stabs. And Carlos Redondo reached 5th at the Mexico special event with it on a Sun team with dual Megas, and the other being Charizard Y. Well done to both of them for giving Mega Steelix at least some legit VGC placement. It may have lost its Mega, but Steelix got some nice help, both directly and indirectly. In Generation 8, the latter came in the form of a limited Pokedex, making its surroundings less hostile, and the former in the form of Body Press, which allowed it to weaponize its stellar defense stat for powerful fighting type coverage. As a result, Steelix moved up to RU, where it was a staple for the entire generation, doing, you guessed it, just Steelix things. Its resist, bulk, and support capabilities, they were all eternal. As always, it would switch into major threats, pop up rocks, harangue the opponent with its stabs, toxic, or occasionally even body press. It was a nice move to have, in rare instances being paired with iron defense for a truly monstrous attack, but far from mandatory or even a staple. Steelix was an outstanding check to the incredibly dangerous Xurkitree. With a careful nature and max special defense investment, it could even tank Xurkitree's grass knots despite its heavy weight, while Steelix reveled in blocking the real threat, which was Volt Switch, and was of course not left wanting for physical defense at all, as it was still effortlessly stifling threats like Mimikyu. The special defense investment helped it extend its defensive reach as a whole, as it also helped greatly in checking another major threat in Togekiss. Plus, Steelix was still irritating to switch into with Toxic and Stab Earthquake alone. The main immunity to those moves, Crobat, was blanked by Steelix completely and feared its Heavy Slam. Funnily enough, there was a brief time where Steelix wasn't RU. It actually went to UU despite not deserving the placement, giving its very low level of viability in the tier, which is why most people weren't using it. But one player wound up spamming so many games with Steelix, and Malamar for that matter, that it threw a wrench in the usage stats, and both of them rose to UU. This was much to the chagrin of RU, who missed Steelix's defensive presence and the stability it brought greatly. But a few months went by, and this anomaly was corrected. Steelix finally dropped back to where it should have been all along. Despite not being a superstar, Steelix was one of RU's most important Pokemon, quietly always doing its thing, and this was most appreciated during its absence and in that blessed time where it finally came back. Steelix is as Steelix does, and Steelix does not seem capable of not excelling in the low tiers as it did once again in Generation 8. Onix received some serious buffs in Generation 8. It got a new high risk, high reward Rock Stab in the form of Head Smash, whose excruciating recoil was just barely outmatched by its massive damage output. Except with Onix's third useful ability, Rockhead, it took no recoil at all, so now the only risk was the 80% accuracy. It also received high horsepower as an alternative ground stab, which it tended to enjoy because of the presence of Grookey and its earthquake weakening grassy terrain. Finally, Onix gained the capacity for massive danger with a boosting set, having gained the excellent Dragon Dance. This would have already been great, but with Head Smash it was downright frightening. Indeed, Onix was a superb Pokemon once again, now capable of running 3 very different sets, each of which were highly effective. 3 lives Sturdy Juice, the classic, Weak Armor Stealth Rock of course, and now Dragon Dance, which quickly established itself as one of the most ferocious, ruthless game enders in the tier, capable of winning games on the spot with just a single boost. A single boost it could reliably grab against common tier staples like Choice Lock Porygon or Magnemite, as well as anything it could take one hit from. from, which with Eviolite was quite a few Pokemon. Even with Onix's attack stat not exactly being the best, a boosted head smash's power was stunning, dropping even the likes of Staryu. It didn't need to commit to sweeping either, as it could also use Explosion to trade itself for Timber. It didn't even need to run Boom though. It could also run Stealth Rock even as a Dragon Dancer. That kind of utility was as amazing as it was rare, and was a testament to how truly superb Onix was, able to throw itself into a battle so consistently as to simultaneously pull off two different kinds of movesets. Onix was a terrific Pokemon once again in Generation 8 Little Cup. And that's it. So how great were Onix and Steelix actually? Well, Onix was one of the worst Pokemon in the game in the first 5 generations. Even when Little Cup came around, it couldn't break in. But some changes in Generation 6, such as the freeing of Berry Juice, turned it into a legitimate Pokemon. And it only improved in Generation 7, becoming one of the best Pokemon in the tier thanks to the possibilities offered by a buffed Weak Armor set. Then Gen 8 gave it Dragon Dance and Head Smash, and it really thrived. It's been one of the most iconic Little Cup Pokemon of recent gens. Steelix, on the other hand, was a pivotal OU force in its debut generation, and was of similar importance even in Ubers. It had a niche in the highest tier in Gen 3 as well, and was one of the better BL Pokemon for what its incredible defense offered teams in OU. In Gen 4, it marked its transition to the lower tiers, where it would continue for the rest of its career. Steelix has repeatedly cemented itself as one of the best lower tier Pokemon ever, with multiple superb appearances across UU, RU, and NU. Sometimes with its Mega Evolution, which was so good as to be banned from Gen 6 RU for its complete dominance of the tier, then rose to UU in the following generation. It's not much of a VGC Pokemon, but considering how lengthy and successful its singles career has been, that's not an issue. Overall, Onix and Steelix have had stellar competitive careers. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Onix or Steelix? Would you give Onix anything in the early gens to have it do anything? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.